Jon Uhler, thanks for being here today. We were just
Wow.
watching this incredible story of this woman who's been incarcerated in a
Mhm.
women's prison in California, and she was housed with a huge violent biological man. She's
Correct.
joined a lawsuit now. This is Tamika's story. She's joined a lawsuit now to sue. But welcome to the program. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm sorry you were having technical difficulties with your with
Yeah.
connecting. But I was telling the audience about you. Why don't you give us a little background on how you got into doing what you do, and then we'll talk about the issues at hand. But I'd love to hear more about you.
Megan, and again, my apologies for running late. I'm hopefully a better clinician than I am a technician, as it were. But
Yeah.
pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to be on. And yeah, the horrible, horrible situation going on. I'm speaking to these issues because I've been a therapist for about 30 years, a full range of uh, clinical settings, including hospital settings. That's when I learned, or that's how I learned about trauma. That had been outside of the scope of my own personal experience. So until you see somebody that has been horrifically sexually abused, you don't know the impact. Worked then with my career can be broken down into thirds. Working with sexual abuse survivors, kids in the system, really the most difficult of cases, what are called severely emotionally disturbed kids. And then I was recruited by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. I spent a little over 11 years on psych staff. Started the nation's first intensive treatment program in long-term solitary confinement. Through that, accrued, here's one of my records. I accrued more clinical contact hours than any single prison psychology staff member in the US or Canada. That'll get you, that and a cup of coffee will get you, or 25 cents. But headed up also one of their standalone specialized forensic units for sexually violent predators, certified in the Harris Psychopathy checklist. I'm currently a certified sex offender treatment provider and also a trauma provider. Also just launched a website called unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Very excited about that. Oh, I'm telling you, that fits right into what we're talking about because we cover all facets of this diabolical movement, including putting men into women's prisons. So that's unmaskingthetransmovement.com.
I can't even believe that this is happening. It's like, okay, I'm reading this story, and I'm like, okay, so he raped one woman, and you didn't take him out. Then he raped two women, and you didn't take him out. Three women, still not enough for you. We're still just going to keep on saying that this is okay. It's incredible.
This is an agenda. It not only facilitates the dreams, as it were, of deviant men, sexually deviant men, but ultimately it fits into the trans deception, what I call the trans deception or the trans movement, because there are a number of special interests that are benefiting from this. And ultimately it's targeting vulnerable women and children. And there's a lot of money to be made. So that's one half of the continuum of special interests. The other half, which is very germane to my background, which are sexual predators. Women need to be very concerned about this movement because this represents an existential threat. Why? Because in my estimation, women represent the last barrier, the last protective barrier to children. And what is behind this movement, at least a significant part of these individuals pushing this, are pedophiles. This is a backdoor into the normalization, and eventually the legalization of pedophilia. And what porn-fueled men, one thing that is key to understanding about porn and its effects upon men. So you don't have any of this without porn. You remove porn, its influence, and those pushing it to groom and influence young people, the trans deception goes away. And what you have with these men, and I can guarantee it, and I will debate anybody, they can come on my show. I have a counseling program called Journey to Healing, Friday nights, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TECN.TV. They can come on, anybody that wants to try to defend this policy, and I can tell you this, 100% of the men that are requesting to be transferred into a women's prison will have some sort of assault on a woman, including children. And if a man assaults a child, my premise is, and I've got 14 years working with sexual predators, my premise is this, that they've also accessed, and they started with adult pornography, and it transitions into very predictable stages. And what porn does is this, and people say, I've got primarily men, of course, get pushback. Oh, Uhler, what? So prior to porn, there wasn't no. The issue is deviance. That's been with us throughout human history. I'll define deviance in a moment, but deviance is the issue. Deviant men are no longer normal. Quite frankly, they are psychopaths. You have two kinds of psychopaths, a bloody psychopath and a white-collar psychopath. Where do we find white-collar psychopaths? All over the place.
In Congress.
Hello, absolutely. Bill Clinton.
In the White House.
Okay, 100%.
Right? On school boards.
Everywhere.
I have run into a white-collar psychopaths in my line of work more often than you would want to.
That's right. And for your listeners to understand a psychopath, and my contention is this: it's not nature, it's not nurture, it's not genetics. Do all those play a role? Of course. The reality is this: very few researchers have spent time behind bars. How much time have they spent? If they've done about 3 hours, it takes a long time to be able to interview a guy. So you're going to take at face value one of the world's greatest liars and deceivers, a psychopath.
Right.
It takes a long time to affect, not that you can't derive meaningful information, but there are three characteristics. They have no conscience, and that's the key. You override your conscience long enough, and you will. Once you override your conscience long enough, and this is male and female, by the way, but you override your conscience long enough, you will no longer be sorry for what you do. Therefore, there's no remorse, and you won't care about the impact it has upon someone else. Therefore, empathy. So no conscience, no remorse, no empathy. Now, you layer that with pornography for a man. Now you've supercharged the process, especially then with the internet. So it is deviance. I'll define deviance. For a man, sex and sexuality progresses downward if he gives himself over to selfishness and violates his conscience. It moves from attraction to lust to power and control. Now and through objectification into a twisting effect. It's very real and it's plottable, meaning you can chart it out, and it will match the degree and quality and kind of pornography into deviance. And it will match also narcissism, then sociopathy and psychopathy. A psychopath is one that is a sexual deviant by nature. How can I say that? Definitively, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections does its own evaluations and assessments. I've done hundreds of those, parole evals and sex offender psych evals, as well as risk assessments. For anybody that has a high-risk offense and anybody that harms a child is a high-risk offender, they are given a secondary assessment by what's called the Sex Offender Assessment Board. I have been offered to go on that board as far as being an evaluator. By nature, that evaluation includes the hair psychopathy checklist. I'm certified in that, the PCLR. So by virtue of the assessment they use, they are acknowledging anybody that harms a child is a psychopath. Someone that is into sexual deviance is no longer into the relationship or moving towards that person because of attraction or lust. They're moving towards having an impact, a negative impact. So sexual deviance is not about attraction. It's not even about lust. It is now about having a negative effect. And with a child, it eventually moves downward. And the dirty little secret about pedophiles is the vast majority of them have gotten into bestiality porn prior to child porn.
Ugh.
That's how. Oh, absolutely. That's how deviant
That's
these
about
guys
dehumanizing
100%.
Children, I'm sure.
And it's about scarring and marring the soul. So you have men that are going into prisons. It is not
Talk about scarring. Talk about scarring and marring the soul when it comes to pornography, because I make this argument with people. I tell people like that porn is dangerous to
100%.
you. It is not safe. And I realize I'm a free speech advocate. I can understand the argument for it, on a free speech level, but it's one of those things that's like, it might be legal, but it is dangerous. So you should not use it. You should choose to look away. Tell me about the scarring and the marring of the soul, because that's very interesting to me.
There you go. That's actually the scarring and the marring of the soul of the victims, especially of children, because a deviant man is driven to have a negative impact. The impact of pornography on a man's mind is measurable in terms of there's been brain scans, but in terms of the soul of a man, I have on my website, there's another website, SurvivorSupport.net. You can find a lot of information under the Insights tab. I've put together, there's one tab called Porn and Dark Deviance. There's another one on porn addiction versus predation. I spent years working with very dangerous men that have done heinous things, and I can tell you this, and my work with and my relationship, my professional relationship with Judith Riesman, who was the one to uncover and unmask Kinsey. She was the first one to really see how dangerous it's a slippery slope.
For people who don't know, Kinsey actually used an actual child predator
Correct.
to experiment on children, to do his experiments on children. Yeah. Used known sexual predators to hurt children for his research. It's so sick. And that people continue to use Kinsey as some kind of model for science or for, it's disgusting.
Yeah, and most people, to show you the extent to which we've been influenced by Kinsey, by the way, so the father of the sexual revolution in the 50s, is most people believe children are sexual at birth. Where did we hear that? Where did we get that phrase? That was from Kinsey. That's a justification for what? That's an invitation to, quote unquote, explore. Who's going to be exploring a child? So there's a lot of urban myths and urban legends. As a matter of fact, they can go on to another site that I have to find the urban legends. That would be churchprotect.org. Church Protect, no space or underscore between those two words, churchprotect.org. A lot of my clinical work is on there. You can look at the myths of predators. There's a lot of information that I derived during my time, because we've been sold a bill of goods such as hurt people, meaning somebody that's been hurt. These guys, a lot of us have been sold a bill of goods as far as, well, if these guys are, quote unquote, acting out, they're reenacting their own sexual trauma at the same age that they were perped on. That is a lie. People need to understand that. That is a lie. Now, is there child upon child and therefore somebody grows up to be reactive? Correct. But there's a paper trail. And those are the ones that everybody understands. When the guy's arrested, people say, I knew that guy was a creep. Those are not the ones that we are concerned about. The ones we're concerned about are the sophisticated pedophiles that by the time they're arrested, nobody can figure it. Not him, because he was in a position of responsibility, of authority, of trust. He was the pastor. He was the teacher. He was the psychologist, the judge, right? Those guys were did not come out of abusive backgrounds. How do we know? Because they're too emotionally stable. And in the PCLR, it's a great instrument, except it's missing a couple pieces, because it will say that psychopaths are impulsive. They are not. There's a number of them are, of course, that they are antisocial. That is not true. Of course, some are antisocial.
You remember that Penn State, wasn't it the coach?
Sandusky.
Sandusky, he was an incredible predator.
That's right.
He preyed on probably hundreds before he was caught.
That's right. So people need to understand that it is a myth with the sophisticated predators. And how do I define that? Those that shocked everybody by the time they were busted and had hundreds of victims. And they're usually in positions in terms of their career or job as a mandated reporter. Isn't that interesting? So they're around kids. They seek that out. Why? Because it's cat and mouse. Half the fun for Predator is playing good people for fools. And that's why this drag queen story hour, furries, people need to understand that. Adults dressing up in big costume, like mascot-like costumes. First time I ever heard about furries was while on site staff doing sex offender treatment from a heinous pedophile who was arrested in a sting situation, who had a bunch of handcuffs and leashes, and he was going to do horrible things to these young kids. So he was busted. He's the one that told me about furries. I'd never heard about furries. What is that? He says, you need to really get a life, get out. I said, what? He said, that's one of our favorite grooming methods. And I said, what is this? He says, you cannot believe if you simply dress up. Now, these are men. If you simply dress up, parents will hand their kids over to you. Furries allows 100% of identity to be concealed, 100%. Now, with these men going into
Parents
prison,
need to know too, the furry thing, these kids are getting into that because it looks like, a fun like cosplay thing. But what we're seeing is at these furry conventions, you now have kids and adults mingling together in this unsupervised thing. It's not okay. Furry is a fetish, by the way. It's a sexual thing. And to let your kid even dabble in fur, like I see a lot of these kids in my kids' school wearing ears and tails and doing
they're
the
being
artwork
groomed.
and stuff. Yeah, they're being
They're
groomed.
being groomed, right? The
I
kid
tried
doesn't
to
know it,
tell someone. I tried to
100%.
tell one of the moms. I was like, this is not okay. And it's nothing that she's doing. She's not doing anything wrong.
That's right.
She's getting into some kind of thing on YouTube, or not YouTube, on the internet, like a Reddit group, on all these groups where they're grooming them into this. Kids don't, they're innocent. They love
Correct.
cats or they love
Correct.
dogs. And so they think that and they're imaginative, right? She didn't believe me. She didn't
Yeah.
believe me.
Because we don't want to believe. And who can, right? Once you start to see how deviant this stuff is, how deviant these people are, and how active they are in hunting, it rocks your world. Your world will be changed. Now, we don't want to become jaded. I don't fear that there's a perp behind every rock, but I'll tell you what, the stuff I know now, what do I know now? Well, you spend enough time, 14 years working with sex offenders. The stuff I know now, unbelievable. I work with everybody's worst nightmare. As a matter of fact, I
I
worked with
can't
the
even
worst of the
imagine.
worst.
I
Hannibal
can't even
Lecter's,
imagine what
the
that's like.
Hannibal Lecters, the men that chop up body parts, they were my clients. And that's what's so funny about,
What
it's,
is that like to sit in a room with
oh,
someone
it'll
like
change
that?
you. It's absolutely
Tell me
surreal.
about it.
Oh, it's like Ted Bundy. Dobson had about 3 hours with Ted Bundy. Great interview. 3 hours. That was one day for me. I spent weeks and years. The only thing I am not at this point, I will, is published, right? And that's the only thing that the perps and perps apologists, especially on Twitter, they just throw that up. Euler, where's your peer review? I've got better than peer review. I've got professional peer review. You go on Church Protect under the MIS tab, then you'll start to see some of the feedback I received from my work. It was novel work, meaning nobody had ever done it before. That's why they had to hire out from the prison system without in the prison system, because all the psychology stuff, they were kind of go on strike, so to speak. So there I was working with these guys, chopped up body parts, prostitutes' body parts. And that's why it's so, people need to understand. And so the challenge I throw out to any administrator or any lawmaker in the States, in Canada, any province, anywhere around the world, you come on my program on live TV, or I will come on yours. You pay for that. Okay. But I challenge
Busted
you
has
because I'm telling you.
Busted has a good question here. And also, like Giver Wings on Rumble, thanks so much for that huge Rumble rant. She sent a $50 Rumble rant and has been having problems with Google Canada. Says, I swear Google Canada is such a pain in the caboose. Blocked me, warned me, and I finally got it. All right, you got past Google. Good for you, like Giver Wings. But anyway, this is a good question. What's the biggest warning sign you see in those types of people?
As a matter of fact, let me finish my challenge, because this is super important, that I challenge anyone to show me that the men that are requesting to be transferred into women's prisons are not a danger to the women, because I will show you, you allow me to go through enough records in any prison system, and I will show you that 100%, let me emphasize it again, or prove me wrong, 100% of the men that are requesting to be transferred into women's prisons have harmed women at some point in time in the past, typically sexually. I have 2 men right now in my sex offender treatment group. I'm almost up to 40 men, 2 of whom on paper look like they've never committed a sexual offense. Why? Because they can plead their case down to look like simple assault. So unless you go into a deep dive, and that's why the stats show, only 50% of these men are sex offenders. Yeah, because the rest have done the horse trading, the plea deal, and they're laughing at the public.
Hey, look at this. Look at this. So I was reading from that UK Guardian article, and look, even they, after telling us that that there's all these terrible rapes going on, look what they did. Look what they did. Um, Not all trans women detainees are sexual predators, adds
Of
Bone.
course.
While
Of
some begin their transition in custody, others have identified as women for years, as if that makes it better. Others still just want out of the harshness of men's lockups and to spend their double-digit sentences in the company of women, she
Yeah,
adds.
who doesn't?
Why do they get that? Like, why are they entitled to that?
Well,
How come
because
they're
it's
criminals and they should
available.
be in jail?
Of course
Trans,
they should.
I mean, this is a guy here who raped several women in Illinois.
Yep.
This one murdered her father and got 2 women inmates pregnant in New Jersey.
His father, by the way.
Oh, sorry, his father. Sorry,
Right.
they're still using
He's a guy.
her.
He's
They're
a guy.
using.
That's right.
Look
It's
at
all
this.
propaganda.
They're using her for this guy who got people pregnant.
That's
Like
right.
it's absurd.
I'll tell you what. If that guy came into my office when I was in the prison and he wanted to transfer, I'd say this: Who are you kidding? Who are you kidding? You know exactly what you're going to do. Listen, I had actual trans on my caseload because I also headed up the last institution in Pennsylvania that I was at. I oversaw the special needs unit. That's where these guys are put. Okay, the actual trans, and this is something people don't understand or wouldn't know. Okay, the actual trans, and by the way, there are no trans people. Let me say this again, and I'll tell you why. There are no trans people. There are sexually confused people. There's male and female. That's it. XXXY chromosomes. 0.00001% of intersex stuff. 30 years I've never dealt with, and I've dealt with the most challenging of cases in a bazillion different settings. Never once come across an intersex. It's rare, super, super rare. This is a grand scheme. People need to understand that. Prior to the year 2005, the trans movement never existed. This is contrived. It is the world's largest scam, scheme, and psychological ruse. People need to understand it. You want to debate, you come on my program. It's a lie.
It is a lie.
Placing
No, it is
women
a lie.
and children in danger. This is a scam. You look at the stats, and it's not until the DSM-5, okay, the psychological Bible, they changed a diagnosis to allow for teens to then be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and that's when the billing started. So in 2013, this thing became profitable. Prior to that, there were no admissions for this stuff. Now,
and it's amazing how many strides they've made in such a short period of time. We've got little girls being medicalized at 3,000% increase from ever before having so-called gender dysphoria, getting medicalized and sent down this path to mutilation, self-mutilation. There's no other way to put it. I know some people don't like me using that word.
Oh, I don't
but
care.
There's no other way to use it. There's no other way to say it.
Megan, you're 100% correct. Listen, parents need to understand this. Guaranteed. It's a moving sidewalk. People need to understand why I'm so passionate. My kids are grown. I could retire. I don't have to do this. But I know it's a lie. So it's a man-made lie. There are no trans anything. Okay? They're male and female that are confused. These kids, about 80% of the trans movement are the victims of all this. These are severely emotionally disturbed kids. These are very troubled kids that are being exploited, and they're being ultimately, a lot of them.
And they're only troubled because their teachers are telling them or confusing them about who they are.
That's right.
You said, my son, I always give people this example because it's so simple when you're dealing with children. I have 2 girls and a little boy. My boy is the youngest. So, of course, when he came along, the house was full of girls' things, right? Girls' costumes, princess dresses, girls' stuff everywhere. When he was 3 years old, I heard a bunch of laughing upstairs, and I go up there to see what's going on. My daughters have him running around in a princess dress.
Mine too.
He's like 3 or 4 years old, and he's having a ball, and I'm like, and they're laughing at him, and I'm like, all right, now what's going on? What are you doing? And they're like, well, he wanted to dress up, and he's running around in this dress. And I say to him, do you want to wear this dress, or do you want a costume? Do you want a cool costume? And he's like, I want a costume. I want to dress up. I want to play dress up. I'm like, great. I'm going to make you the coolest king costume that I can come up with. And I did. I made him with a cape, and it had fur on it, and I had a big crown, and I gave him a sword, And then I bought a bunch of cool costumes for him. I bought fireman costumes and I bought police costumes. The kid never looked at another princess dress again. He had an astronaut costume he used to run around in constantly. But I mean, it's that simple. You don't just because your son puts on a dress, you don't say, well, we should start calling you Mary and she, her now, I guess. Like, I guess we need to get down to the gender clinic because there's something wrong. They're 3.
That's right. Megan, I remember my kid, almost the same scenario. My daughter dresses my son up. I look out, he's running around the yard in one of her little ballet, thing,
Sisters
little
are
tutu,
terrible.
right? But then he's got his cowboy boots on. And he's doing his cap guns. It's like, and he had his little cowboy hat on.
In a tutu with the guns.
It's like, okay,
I love it.
Right. But what I tell people is this: in terms of child development, kids will not have a sexualized thought until hormones kick in.
Right.
They just won't. It doesn't work. If you have a child that has a sexualized thought prior to puberty, then they've been influenced or groomed from the outside.
This is what I tell people all the time.
100%.
It's not normal for a child to behave sexually or to talk about sex. It's not normal for any child. One of my favorite based lesbians has an Instagram account. She was just on there. Somebody had asked her, do you tell your child about, because she's single, she has like a girlfriend, do you tell your 4-year-old or whatever about your relationship? Her answer was no. And we don't hide, but we don't do anything inappropriate in front of a child because that's wrong. You don't introduce complex ideas into the minds of children. You let them ask you questions. And I have this is my rule for everything when it comes to sex and kids. You wait until they say to you, where do babies come from? And sometimes you don't want to go too much into detail. You just want to answer the question they asked. You just say, where do babies, mommies and daddies make babies? And sometimes they go, okay. And they run around and then they're done. You don't give them too much information until they're ready to process it. This thing about going for kindergartners and teaching them about pleasure-based sex. Oh my God.
It's sexual grooming. It's sexual
abuse.
Grooming. People need to understand this. The books that are being pushed by those that are associated with the trans deception. If one of my sex offender one of the guys in my sex
offenders, that sounds really funny.
I'm so warped now. It does. It's scary. Right? Okay.
That's really funny.
Okay. Cut time. We'll take a step back.
We'll edit that out. Don't worry.
Thank you very much. Okay. If one of the men in my sex offender treatment groups were to be found in possession, this is literally true, were to be found in possession of any of these books that are being pushed to these kids, that have the drawings of these kids doing sexual things with each other, they would be violated out of group and sent back to prison.
Oh, if you were a stranger on the street and you showed that to a child in a park, you would be charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Thank you very much. And corrupting the morals.
If you're a teacher,
there you go.
If you're a teacher, you can literally, I'm sorry, chat, I'm going to do it to you. I'm going to do it to you, audience. I can't not do it when we're talking about this content. But if you're a teacher, you can just put this up in front of your kid and the kids in your class, and this is perfectly fine. This is perfectly fine. Oh no, it isn't. This is not okay.
Megan, go back to that previous screen. And I want to ask parents, see the upper right-hand corner? What's happening there? Oral sex. That is being shown. This picture. Now,
here, I have a close-up.
Right? The parents, I want everybody to think about this question as you're staring at this. Are you more offended that Megan just showed this, or are you offended that this is being shown to your kids?
Mm-hmm.
We need to get over the shock value because
I know every time I put it up, people are like, my eyes.
Right.
I'm like,
well, grow up.
I realize you don't want to see it. I don't want to see it.
But
John
the kids
doesn't want to see it.
are being shown this.
Your children are seeing this. Your children are seeing it. And I'm telling you, it is so sick. It is so sick. We have to continue to expose it because this is not okay. This is exactly the kind of thing that every pedophile dreams of showing a kid to
100%.
break down their barriers, to
100%.
break, right? I mean, how many child sex offenders have you dealt with, John?
Hundreds.
And what do you think? So I'm going back to that question in the chat. It was, what are some of the biggest red flags, the warning signs for predators like this?
Right. One of the red flags online, because they're all over online, you look for some guy that's going to hide his identity and some guy that has an unusual interest in defending pornography and pushing back against the idea that the trans deception is sexualizing kids. Now, that's online. In person, what you look for is a guy that seems unusually interested in being around other people's kids. Now, let me qualify that statement. Okay,
It's
in
so
this
tough,
sense.
though, for men to then ever be, coaches or anything else without,
Correct.
because we've had some fantastic,
Correct.
little league coaches, and I sometimes feel really bad for men who just love kids and
That's right.
want to help, and then but I'm sure they're always thinking that parents are always thinking, you know,
They had better be. Now, here's the difference, though. It's the man who wants to be alone with somebody else's kids. How did the Boy Scouts end up with over 100,000 victims because of overnight
yeah,
campouts with a scoutmaster? I used to be a part of Boy Scouts. I didn't get very far because I didn't really like sleeping on the ground and trying to figure out why am I sleeping on pine cones and stuff. This isn't all that comfortable.
this
Okay, but anyways,
is
um,
not your jam, huh?
you know, but predators. I'll tell you, the number one hunting ground for predators they love are faith-based communities or churches. That's sort of
Yeah.
my background. I was a youth director. Now looking back, if I'd been a perp, I did overnights with these kids. It exhausted me, but no parents were there.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
first of
we
all,
did
parents.
my youth group. We did overnights all the time. We
I
we
know it.
even once stayed in hotels. We stayed in a hotel for a conference, and the only people watching us were our youth pastor and his wife. And they were
Sure.
in a different hotel room. Like anything could have gone on. Like
Correct.
nothing did. But you're right. I mean, churches. It's tough because you want to have those experiences with the kids, right? You want to have that sense of community, and like the overnights can be really fun. But how in the world do you just have to do better with these chaperoning,
Yeah.
period.
And since the internet and since phones, I
Mm,
I caution anybody about doing overnights anymore.
yeah.
You better have enough adults. If you don't have enough adults, do not have the activity. And I say to parents, no more slumber parties. Those days are
Yeah.
over. How many perps did I deal with that the neighbor kids, that these perps, these stepdads, were accessing somebody else's kids or their own stepkid.
That's
Okay,
so sad.
and porn
I have a
underlies all this
rule.
stuff.
I have a
Mhm.
rule with my kids. Sleepovers were pretty rare, and the only ones they were ever allowed to do were at my house or with people we knew very well. Like
Right.
we knew the parents, both parents, very well, and they weren't allowed to go until they were of an age to tell us, if something had happened,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't we would have these, conversations. But you're right. In today's day and age, it's very tough. My daughter, I'm always thrilled that my daughter's best friend, her father is um, a law officer who is just one of the greatest guys I know. Her father, so I always feel really good about sending her there because this guy hates sex offenders so much. He's locked up so many of them. We have all kinds of fun conversations about that. But it's tough because it's not like you trust many people. You have to really know a person. You have to
Yeah.
really know them to trust them with your children. And it's very, very difficult. Very difficult.
That's right. So that would be really the first indicator. Do you have a man that shows an unusual degree of interest in somebody else's kids? Now, again, so that we don't become paranoid, but the goal is not to become jaded. The goal is to become discerning and adequately protective. Okay? Because predators know us better than we know them. Why? Because my theory, my contention is they once had a conscience. They now have dispensed with their conscience over time, violating it incrementally. They've reached a point where they have no conscience. And for those of us with a conscience, so that's why they are psychopaths. So anybody that harms a child is a psychopath. And speaking of faith-based, no wonder why Jesus said, if you even think about harming a child, you notice he didn't fault the
Millstone.
right. And what is a millstone? The
It's a
Greek word
giant
was that's right.
stone.
Okay, the Greek word was scandalon. We get in English scandalize. So what a powerful word picture. He's saying this. What you're about to do, the stuff you're thinking about doing, you're going to place around the neck of that young person something that will, it's called a stumbling block, that they will stumble over the rest of their life. The vast majority of people that have a very difficult time with quote unquote religion, those have been traumatized. You traumatize a child, you sexually cross boundaries, they will stumble over that
This is a millstone
issue for the rest of their lives. There you go.
This is how big it is. Imagine tying one of those around your neck and throwing you into the ocean. That's what Jesus said should be done. Look how huge. Look how heavy. You know what would happen? You'd go right to the bottom of the ocean.
That's right. Now, the question is this: did it need to be that big, and how deep of a body of water? No, that shows you that's visceral. People think that Jesus never got angry. Oh, no, he got angry about the right things. And what he was saying is to the would-be perp, basically this: don't you even. Okay.
So you know what's interesting about the millstone argument from Jesus is that was actually a Roman torture method. So that was a way to execute people that the Romans used. Josephus Flavius wrote about it, and it was absolutely brutal. And the fact that Jesus himself would be like, "Yeah, I agree with the Romans." Like, put that.
100%.
I agree with the Romans. So it shows you there's a time for that type of punishment, and the time is when people harm children. Look at what I just saw on Twitter the other day. So I got to show you this because this pissed me off like nothing else I've seen in a long time.
Good.
I have no patience for people who claim to be conservative and ignore blatant child grooming, and that's what this is. Let me pull it up. Where did I put it? Someone said on Twitter, conservatives have better things to do, more things to do, and more important things to do than get after Rihanna for what she did at the NFL Super Bowl. And I said, absolutely not. That's false. Because what she did was touch herself and smell her finger on television.
See, I didn't even watch it. I'm glad you told me that. Really? Well, I'll tell you what, whoever is going to write that, my response is this. Law enforcement needs to investigate that guy's electronics, online activity, financial records, and phones, GPS. Simple as that.
It can't be. It is absolutely there. Let me just be very clear. There is nothing more important for conservative people to do than stand between children and those who would groom them sexually. And Rihanna is guilty. And I don't care that she's a mother and that she has her own children. That makes me want to say damn her even more because she has children and she would do that in front of your child. That makes her a groomer. That makes her disgusting. And we need to point it out. And it's not unimportant. It is not. It's actually very important to say, especially because people are always saying, oh, well, you only care about this because it's gay people doing this. Oh, no, I don't. I have a problem with anyone who wants to put sexuality and sex in front of my kids. And everyone knows that children watch the Super Bowl. My son is 8 years old, and I don't let him watch the Super Bowl halftime show. Never, because I'm not stupid. But it really bothers me that I can't let him watch it because here it is. She said, actually, as a conservative, we have larger, more important issues to tackle instead of Rihanna. And I said, no, false. Adults not respecting the sexual boundaries of children is the most pressing problem we have. And the NFL needs to honor those families who tune in with all ages and stop this degeneracy in grooming because it's gross. And there's no bigger issue than protecting children, conservatives. Do not let anyone tell you that complaining about what these people are doing is a problem. It's not they're the problem and they need to stop it. And the NFL needs to know we don't want this.
Right. And that same person would then no doubt defend pornography because they have no clue what happens to men and their minds with pornography. They just don't care. And they don't care that kids are being groomed into, for instance, a big portion of this sexualization of kids in schools that goes part and parcel with the trans deception is the legitimization and normalization of prostitution. That's how you end up trafficking kids. And how do I know? Look at the stats and look at the men that I've dealt with. Okay, pornography always, prostitution. Prostitution, again, is all about deviance. Only deviant men are going to access prostitutes. How do I know? Because they're taking a woman who's obviously not doing it because she has no other, has best of career options. Mm-hmm. And they are able to use women for sexual gratification. That is a man that's already into objectification. are we dealing with a normal man? No, a normal man would ask her, what are you doing? And do you need financial help? No, he's going to exploit her. So any man that can objectify is already on the pathway toward sexual deviance. Megan, to finish up the issue of men and women's prisons, here's what people also need to know, because it's such a vital issue, and it fits all together with this, because my contention is this, and it's the reality. No man thinks it's a reasonable proposition, pardon the pun, no man thinks it's reasonable to dress in women's underwear and drag unless they've saturated their minds in thousands of hours of porn in this day and age. They are sexually deviant. Therefore, you don't know what they're all about. Porn causes a man to become malevolent towards women. That's why they have no problem putting their hands around the throat of a woman. We used to call that sexual assault. 50 Shades of Grey is what used to happen in the Middle Ages to extract information from people. Any woman that dates a guy that is into pornography, especially 50 Shades of Grey, is inviting pain into her life, certainly assault by one degree or another. Stay away from any guy that's into kink, any guy that's into fetishes. Fetishes are nothing more than perversion. You're dealing with very dangerous men, and the ones that want to go into women's prisons, the quote unquote true trans, and I already qualified that statement, they don't want to go to women's prisons. Why? Because these are men that typically were into prostitution, and they like the male attention. So guess where they stay? They stay in the male institutions. How do I know? I had 4 of them on my caseload, and I'm the only psych staff in the U.S. that stood up to defend a trans inmate, by the way. So it's not the true trans guys. Again, I take issue with that term, but just using it. The true trans don't want to be transferred to women's prisons. They like the attention. They're given
because
special attention anyways.
They're considered homosexual.
That's
transsexuals.
Right.
There's a difference between homosexual, transsexual, and autogynephilia. Are the men that you're treating and the men that you see that are doing this, would you say 100% they are autogynephilic?
Well, I even sort of reject that term. Now, I'm Blanchard, right? I'm familiar with it, and I'm okay since it's become part of the vernacular. Okay, what you're dealing with an AGP is really a sexually deviant guy that's getting aroused. He's getting off on picturing himself as a woman. He's getting off on the woman that he's becoming. Okay,
and but it's women's spaces, though. I think they also get off on that.
Okay, 100%. As a matter of fact, only predators are going to want to go into women's and children's private spaces. How can I say that? One easy way to show this to be a reality is look at online the pictures of people that are taking pictures of themselves in the opposite sex restrooms. How many women dressed as guys?
Women don't do this.
There you go. It's only the guys taking a picture.
I've had the same problem. It's like, if you are in a women's bathroom and you are not going to the bathroom or washing your hands or doing your makeup and you're taking pictures of yourself, there's something wrong. We don't do that. I've literally never taken a selfie in a public bathroom in my life. There would be no reason. And it's also extremely upsetting for anyone in a ladies' room to have anyone else with a camera out. Like, we wouldn't do that. Everybody's very sensitive. Women are very sensitive to like cameras in public bathrooms. That would freak us out. We've heard stories about hidden cameras. We're not going to take our cameras out when there's in a bathroom. Why?
And that's why they're doing it, Megan. That's why.
Exactly.
Okay, men and women's sports, it's not for the medals. They're toying with the women. This is cat and mouse. Because they've developed a malevolence, it's to prevent the women from being able to win. But they don't care. These guys don't care. Like Leela Thomas, I'd love to have him come on my program. He and I can have a little chat.
I can't. Okay, I cannot stand him.
Okay, the goal is he wants to go into it's the locker rooms, it's the showers. That's what these guys are all about, and they will always have their cell phone cameras with them. So the men that want to go into the private spaces, including the prisons, it's all about traumatizing women, and they're going to have, in that case, they're going to have access to the women, and they're going to rape them.
Cynthia's got a great question. Thanks for the super chat, by the way. She says, thoughts on travel sports teams and what you're saying to that. This weekend, my 14-year-old girl will be in D.C. for a volleyball tournament. 4 girls to a room, 2 chaperones who I don't know with their own room. Only way to be a D1 athlete. That's true. Can you go, Cynthia? Can you go with? I would go with. I would probably volunteer to be a chaperone. I've done
There we
those
go.
school
There we
trips,
go.
by the way. But I've gone. They usually allow parents to go. My daughter went on a 6th grade trip to Philadelphia, and it was fantastic. But I went, and I was actually one of the chaperones, and we shared a room together. They allowed me and my daughter to be together with with her friend and her friend's mom together, all of us together. So I thought that was perfectly safe. Um, but I mean, what would you say, John?
Probably what you said. I mean, right? This is so horrible what's happened in our society. But let me ask you this, to any parent. There's no easy answer. I mean, my kids are grown. I have a daughter and 2 boys now, all in their mid to late 20s. But are those kids going to, so let's say that even the adults are safe. Okay. Are those kids going to have cell phones with them? Of course. Internet access, of course. You tell me, with
Yeah.
those 4, do you think one of them are going to have unfiltered access to the internet?
Oh yeah, probably. And
Yeah.
I tell my daughter, of course, I have these conversations with the parents also of where there's sleepovers or whatever, but the parents that of the kids where she does have a sleepover occasionally, they're all in agreement with me. We don't allow phones and digital devices at sleepovers. It's not allowed. So they're not allowed to have it,
Okay.
period.
Okay.
And that's at my house, whether they're at my house or at another house, that's off the table. And my explanation for that is to the kids is, hey, you guys are having a sleepover. This is for games between the two of you. It's not for making phone calls to anybody else. You're going to watch movies together. You're going to have snacks. This is not about doing anything online. It's about enjoying each other's company, period. That's it. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So far, so good. Haven't had any issues. My kids are pretty well trained as far as letting me know if anything, and they haven't. None of their friends. We haven't had this problem. But then again, we're also in a pretty small community with, these are Catholic school friends, and their parents are pretty severe as I am. We're all pretty strict.
You're protective. It's such a challenge. Is there an easy answer that parents just have to be vigilant, but also just assume? Because look, everything. What I tell people is the perps and the advertisements. They're all coming towards your kids. We have to assume our kids have seen stuff, but if we don't help them process what they're seeing, if we don't help them understand what healthy sexuality is versus not, and the dangers of predators, then we're setting them up to be sitting ducks for predators, because predators will do whatever they need to do to access kids. They love playing good people for fools. They love, and they're methodical and they're patient. People need to understand that they are driven not because of attraction. This minor attracted persons, it's a bunch of crap. Okay, nobody who perps on a kid is attracted to the kid. Okay, they are driven to defile and mar and scar the soul of the kid. They want to leave a lasting impact, a negative lasting impact,
God, that's
sealing
sick.
innocence.
So
Of
what you're
course it is.
saying is like they're sadists.
Correct.
Uh, Fubar
Correct.
Temp, this is a good question. Do you ever work with any female pedophiles? These like the teachers who are, sleeping with younger male students. There are a lot of those, and they are kind of harder to identify. This is a very good point. Like I see these women and I think, what is wrong with you? Like, for one, women are naturally supposed to be the protectors of children, and something has broken down for women to be able to take part in this kind of and it's probably it's probably porn addictions. Women have these porn addictions too, and porn is bad for you. But do you treat women sex offenders?
I don't, not that I wouldn't, but my population's been men. But because I understand the population of women, I can surmise, and typically very few women sexually offend. In the state of Pennsylvania, which is the 4th largest prison system, I believe, because you have Florida, Texas, California, and then Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is, I think, the oldest prison system. It's the most cutting edge. I think you now have 25. You used to have 27. So 25 prisons, only 2 are for women. So that's of all offenses, of course. Okay, so you see the percentage, it's very small. Very, very few women sexually offend. Very few. It usually comes down to 2 camps. One, kind of like the drug mules, they were influenced, they were facilitating, so they were useful idiots. That's not a pejorative term. So you have that kind. You also have the kind that was facilitating it. So that's either the female pimps or the Ghislaine Maxwell's with the Epstein, or Rare is the time, people need to understand this, rare is the time, it's almost unheard of, that a woman rapes a young child and uses an object. Rare as I don't even know if I know of a case. The majority of the ones that we hear of, so you have other women that traffic women. So think about those that have no alien status or no green card. They bring these women over. They work in massage parlors, so to speak. Right? They are human trafficking. It's a lot of times it's women that are the pimps. It's surreal, but they're also oftentimes working with guys. But oftentimes it's the developmentally stuck woman. I'm not defending it. She needs to do time, but you look at the majority of the cases that you'll tend to hear that the young person is either in high school or maybe junior high, rarely underneath that. Now, I'm not defending it, but big difference. You go below puberty, you're in a different category.
I actually know a woman who's in jail. I grew up with her, who got over 50 years in prison for sexually abusing her 4-year-old. And I can't even. I grew up with this woman. I can't wrap my head around it. I read the charges. She was charged with trafficking a child across state lines. There wasn't a ton of information, but it sounded like they had her agreeing to bring her child to
Yep.
a hotel to some man and engaged in abuse with this man against her child. And I'm
there you go. She probably held the child down.
I
See,
can't even. I
that's
can't.
oftentimes, yeah, that's oftentimes the case. Why? Because you either have drug
Drugs.
situations
I think drugs.
or lured into like a cult-like relationship.
Yeah.
Very often
I think it was
that's the
drugs
case. Yeah,
personally.
yeah.
Delio Turk says, thanks for the super chat, by the way. Any advice for helping or rehabilitating men struggling with sexual deviance? Can they be rehabilitated? Is there rehabilitation for these men?
These are the guys that I deal with all the time. Here's my own perspective. Without a faith-based perspective, there's no hope. First of all, with pedophiles, there's no hope. Now, how do I approach these
None
guys?
at all. None at all. For
No,
pedophiles,
no.
it's a see, I didn't think so either.
Right. Now,
I don't know.
let me qualify that. Because here I work with them. Do I actually say that? If any of them are listening, what I would say is, don't be one of them. You always want, from a human perspective, we always want to believe there's hope, and for safety's sake, for society, for no future victims, I proceed always the same. My contention is this: it's always a violation of conscience, and therefore you have to get their conscience back. If a guy's gone too far, then his conscience is gone. His brain has become psychopathic. You can Google as far as the brain scans of psychopaths. They are different, according to Robert Hare of the PCLR. I agree. There's no coming back. James Fallon has done a pretty good job as well. Okay,
so you cannot rehabilitate once you've changed your brain. You can't change it back?
And the way it processes, no. And that's what's scary. As a matter of fact, in Romans chapter 1, with the reprobate mind, people need to understand that. Okay, the reprobate mind, most of us, if we're familiar with that in Romans chapter 1, we've come to equate, isn't he? Right? We've come to equate reprobate with sexual. It's not. Now, layer that with sexuality. But the term reprobate comes from metallurgy. It means it's no longer useful for its intended purpose. What is the intended purpose of the human mind? It's different than the gray matter and the white matter and the IQ points. A pedophile, his brain still, the IQ points are still the same, right? Now he's affected it with porn, but the way the mind operates, the mind of a psychopath, you look at the processing and where it lights up and heats up in the brain. A psychopath does not have activity in the brain where conscience and empathy and remorse should be when looking at different pictures in a spontaneous fashion before your mind can engage, your brain can engage. But there'll be a lot of activity in the occipital, the back of the brain, the occipital region. That's where analysis takes place. Psychopaths manage the impression you have of them. They're working the crowd. That's why they're politicians, by the way, or they're on Wall Street. Okay, and that's why my contention has become they're narcissists first. You go through narcissism into sociopathy, which is sales, by the way, cost-benefit analysis. When the cost gets too much and it outweighs the benefit, they'll move on. But they will take their money and run. It's like the song, The Gambler, you need to know when to hold them, fold them, walk away and run. Okay, that's a sociopath. A psychopath won't do that. A psychopath will continue because now it's cat and mouse, and they're driven to have the last word, last say, last laugh, and a negative impact upon you. If you dare put boundaries up with a psychopath versus a sociopath, and you can have both populations in a prison, they're all sitting there, you'll know the psychopaths for the sociopaths, because the sociopaths are freaked out by the psychopaths, the statements that come out of the psychopath's mouth. That's what's so beneficial about working in a prison that you would never get with 3 hours going into a prison and having an interview with these guys. Plus, if they interview pedophiles, what researchers don't understand, and I would not have understood this prior to working the prison system, is this. It's a lengthy process to interview somebody in a prison system. And the most dangerous position to be in is to be a pedophile in a prison. That is very true. So why is somebody going to volunteer? Because there are no secrets in jail. Everybody's going to know who signed up, because unless you want to talk to a specific pedophile, there's a request. I'd like to talk to 5 pedophiles. I'm a researcher for Penn State. Okay, it goes through central office. It goes down to the local institution. Now, word is put out on the block one way or the other. Well, that's not a good thing. So the question is, well, who volunteers?
Right.
Okay, right? So somebody's going to write a research article, says we have definitive firsthand information. We sat down with pedophiles in prison. How did you sit down with them? You had to go through a process. You had about 3 hours each. Who did you get? Well, the prison provided them. Well, who did they provide? The guys that signed up. Who's going to sign up? Only those that have enough protection. How do they have enough protection? Through the unit management or up the security chain. How do they do that? They've given up goods, so they're adequately protected. So what the researcher doesn't understand is when they're sitting in front of the researcher thinks they're getting inside information. They don't know the pedophile's working them. It's practice for parole.
Oh boy.
That's what researchers don't know. Now, is it that researchers can't derive? So no, they can. But if you think you're going to get accurate information as far as motivation from the world's greatest liars within 3 hours, you're a fool, because they know everything you're going to print is going to make its way to parole. But these perps are interested, and agenda-driven researchers are interested in influencing laws and legislation and sentencing structures, just like Benjamin Levine was head of the Ontario education system.
Who the hell is working for better sentencing structures for pedophiles?
For them. They get off easy. That's what they want, because they know, every pedophile knows this. It's all about security for them, meaning they know it's only a matter of time. Possibly you go in that direction, now you're playing the odds. If you get busted, you want to make sure you're going to get out as soon as possible, or maybe diverted to treatment. Benjamin Levine was the Secretary of Education for Ontario, the province of Ontario up in Canada. He was the one to push the sexual orientation, gender identity, all the perp crap onto kids, the stuff that we're seeing through the trans deception. It turned out he was a heinous pedophile. Well, he was able to get out of prison early. Why? Because of the influence. He was able to strategically, and this is what they do, they strategically use this to change public opinion. They influence then the lawmakers, and the lawmakers push laws and policies that go easy on. It switches sympathies from the victims to the perpetrators. So he was able to get out early because policies had been changed, because he was able to change the sentiments of people. So he benefited. He knew if he got busted, and that's the only reason why these MAPs, it's a deceptive term, minor attracted persons, the only reason they're going to go to treatment is as an insurance policy in case they get busted, because then they can ask their therapist to stand up in court for them. It's all a ruse. And the one thing, James Cantor and others that want to say that, oh, these guys are minor attracted, the one thing these therapists will never ask the guys is about their porn use. And I had James Cantor, I challenged him. He's starting to run his mouth online. He's the world's greatest researcher on what? Pedophiles. Really, that's a very interesting sector. I say this, unless you can monitor this guy 24/7, you're a fool. If you think you've got definitive information. I asked him, oh, really? So you think what you're getting is, yep, I know exactly. They're being honest. Oh, okay. So
I mean,
virtuous pedophile, non-offending. How do you know?
Yeah, they don't. There's no way. And I'm reading a book. I started reading a book about the BTK. It was his autobiography that was written by him and the researcher, psychologist that was forensic psychologist that was interviewing him over a long period of time. But even then, even still, as I read it, I'm like, This is bullshit. This tells
Correct.
me nothing about
Correct.
this man is a liar. That's what he is. He's a liar. And we learn nothing from this. The only thing I have learned from it so far is that this man, in his mind, associates his victims with food, with delicious, tasty food,
Right.
which I probably believe that. That's probably the only thing about it that I believe is that he viewed his victims as things to be devoured. I absolutely would believe that
That's right.
part of
And
it.
he was demon possessed. He called it like factor X. And that's the
Factor
one thing
X, yeah.
the psychology staff in psychology in the prison system, understandably, but they will never, because they can't. But I've heard it too much from different inmates that have harmed people, that something came over them. They're still responsible, but you toy with this stuff, you will invite more than you bargained for. I've
So
heard it
you
from
think
too
he was
many men.
demon possessed? I'm not.
100%.
I'm
You
not.
watch the tape. You watch the tape of his interview. He actually says it. He says, "You know what? I'm not sure," because I've watched that interview with the live through the
Yeah,
camera feed.
I
It's
would
on
believe you.
YouTube.
I mean, I'm a Catholic, for crying out loud. We have
Yeah. No,
exorcists for this.
what he
We
says
have
in that back
exorcists
and
for
forth
these things. I
dialogue,
would believe you.
right? It's very interesting. I even show that to some of the
That
sex
actually
offenders.
makes more sense to me
Yeah.
than anything I read in that book, because here's the thing. She acknowledges this factor X thing, right? She
Yeah.
acknowledges it and mentions that Jeffrey Dahmer said something very similar. Dahmer
Correct.
said, it was just this like internal hunger thing that they can't shut off. It was just
Correct.
something that would build up and build up and build up, right? A lot of them say that same thing.
Correct.
So I would actually believe that. I hadn't even considered it,
Oh,
but that
yeah.
makes more sense. Tell me
As a matter
about
of
the
fact,
video.
here.
Which video that you've seen of him?
The interview where they have him. Actually, the psychologist that goes in. So it's on YouTube. I have snippets of that for my sex offender treatment guys. And so we analyze that. Also, Richard Ramirez, the Hillside Strangler.
Oh God, he's the Night Stalker.
Night Stalker, I'm sorry.
And
Correct.
I always tell people the media is so complicit in this by naming him the Night Stalker, this incredibly scary, sexy name. They should have called him the creeping coward or something, because that Night Stalker name is just like.
But two very different backgrounds. BTK killer was attended a church on a regular basis,
and he had a very good childhood, a very nice childhood.
There you go. That's
no
exactly
abuse.
Right.
No
That's
abuse,
exactly right.
Which
Same
is
thing with,
incredible to me. No, how? And he developed his weird fetishes with bondage at a very early age.
Correct.
A
it's
very
pornography.
early age.
It's pornography.
He said he did. Well, it wasn't technically pornography. I don't think it was like those detective magazines.
It's pornography.
Is it pornography?
Because what's happened with the detective, I couldn't believe it. As a matter of fact, in the sex offender treatment unit, the high intensity sexually violent predator one, at SEI Crescent before they shut that down. So I'm in charge of treatment for a year. And the librarian would come in. So these guys, it's a self-contained unit, but they would still have access to the library. Well, the librarian would come in with big carts. And so I said, and these guys are all in open air cubicles. Okay, so they're not behind bars. The whole thing is behind bars, of course, but it's what they call a TC. So,
uh-oh. We're losing you there for a second.
But it's like,
I think you're... hold on, your Wi-Fi is being a little weird.
Desk, which is L.
Uh-oh.
Am I good?
You sound like a robot. I think you're coming back now. Let's try again. I heard open.
There we go.
I heard open air containment.
Okay, there you go. So in that particular unit, 65 bed, it looked like they had dividers in an open concept for an office space. How the dividers. Okay, so you kind of have these makeshift little spaces. So from the officer's desk, you can look over all the 65 guys and you can see what they're doing. Well,
they call that a pod, right? Isn't that the pod? The way they
or pod can be euphemistic for also the housing unit. But this particular one, so the dividers are about maybe 4 feet high. Okay. So it's their own quote unquote living space, but it's 2 per person in that situation. But what's interesting is you can see what they're doing. You can see what's on their TV. And you can see what they're reading, whatever they're reading. So you can walk up and down the aisles. So all of a sudden I'm walking up and down one time and I'm seeing these guys with almost looked like Harlequin romance. And I'm just so I asked one guy, and I saw on the cover, it shows a woman being drowned in a bathtub.
Holy crap.
Okay, this is a high intensity sex offender treatment unit. And so I look and I said, hey, what's going on? He says, I'm just reading. I said, really? So I'm looking at the cover and I said, I said, what's that? Oh, it's a detective. book. I said, really? Do you read these off? Oh, yeah. I said, and what's going on in this? Oh, yeah, I knew. Okay, so
Murder.
the snuff stuff, so snuff novels, these guys get off on that. That's the process of
Who is
deviance.
writing these? So here's the thing. BTK said, Dennis Rader says that he had these thoughts of bondage and stuff before he ever saw a detective magazine. And because he describes in the book the moment he saw one and saw pictures of women that he had been imagining exactly like that. And
Interesting.
he claims he never saw it before when he had these he says the very first time that he saw a woman struggle and I guess got turned on by it. He was only like 10 years old and his mother got her hand stuck in the couch, got her ring stuck on a spring, and he had to go run and get for help.
Okay, no, he's
Get
lying
help
through his
for her.
teeth with
I
that.
know.
He's lying through. He's
I
just lying
don't
through his
believe
teeth.
him. I don't believe
No,
him.
and
He must
why are
have
you going?
seen it.
Right?
No
But
child
no,
has
no.
images of women tied up in their
No,
mind.
he's lying through his teeth because he doesn't want to admit, and that's what's so interesting. They don't want to admit that there's a corresponding relationship or a connection between what they were into and the kind of porn they progress. There's stages of pornography. It used to be, and people, pro porn perps get in debates with me and they say, "Oh, Euler, how do you define porn?" I know, Playboy. Oh, that's entertainment. Yeah, look how far you've fallen. Okay.
Hmm.
Playboy should be considered still pornography, and the paper version way back in the day. So, what I would say to any guy is this: if you're looking at anything equivalent to Playboy or worse, the old fashioned Playboys, then you're looking at pornography. Now, the question, and one of the things that I work with my guys is unless they can tell me, this is kind of what they have to do, unless they can help their offense make sense in terms of their pornography, what they were into, they're not getting out
These are the
because it's always,
magazines.
always pornography. Now, there you
These are
go.
the types
Okay.
of
So,
magazines that the BTK
Rob,
was talking about.
now what's
Yeah.
interesting is Robert Hare, during our training, he said that the two um, populations, as far as careers that are filled with psychopaths, but again, I would say they're filled everywhere. But it's interesting that he pointed out in his research, psychology and law enforcement. Now, I think the reason why, now, how big of a study did he do? I don't know. But they love instant power and control, just like those that are arsonists. And a lot of arsonists, a case could be made, a lot of them are abused. The three indicators of severe abuse are enuresis and capricis, wetting and soiling oneself, cruelty to animals, and fire setting. So a lot of arsonists, you will find abuse in their background, sexual abuse. And they'll go back to the scene. Well, what are these guys doing? Very few. I divide the camps of sex offenders into this: the sophisticated versus impulsive. And the sophisticated ones are the ones that everybody is surprised by. If you're a sophisticated predator, you are not sexually abused because that presupposes that a child can be sexually abused and so contain his or her emotions that nobody notices and there's no paper trail, no acting out one way or the other. That is implausible. If you have a child that's been perped on, they're either going to act in or act out. A third grade kid, you mean to tell me nobody's going to notice? My wife was a 30-year second grade school teacher. And even at that age, in retrospect, she can remember she had to call CPS a couple times. If a child's being abused, you're going to see behavioral changes. What we're being told, what we're being sold, this idea of minor attracted persons, by the time the guy was busted, that he tries to say, oh, he was depressed. That's a lie. He had mental health issues. Really? Prove it. You show me your past mental health records. They never do. They say, well, I don't have them. Oh, so I'm supposed to take your word at it. But these guys will never acknowledge, and in order of, in terms of the ones that will, but they'll never volunteer. A sex offender will never volunteer how much porn they were using. And 100%, people need to understand this, 100% of all sex offenders were deeply steeped in porn prior to offending. I would say probably since the 70s. Now, you'll still have people say, oh, so you think it's porn. What about prior to porn? Isn't that interesting? We're still doing that dance. We're going to defend and rationalize and justify. What I say is, again, and people need to hear this, it's not porn. Okay, it's deviance. Deviance causes offending. What is a deviant? Somebody that wants to have a negative impact upon you, a lasting negative impact. Now, you will supercharge the process of deviance. There's about 10 stages downward. You will supercharge that process, meaning now we're going down fast through porn and the internet. So ever since porn and the internet, you will not find it. You find it for me and you send it to me. Okay? You will not have a sex offense devoid of pornography, and 100% of pedophiles, 100% without exceptions. I had all the records, Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. 100% of pedophiles are deeply steeped in child rape pornography prior to offending, and 98, 99% are also busted. So they're busted with child rape pornography. They're also busted with the dissemination or distribution. They're passing it along. This is how deviant these guys, and the vast majority of pedophiles, I would say 100% of them, but the vast majority of them were into bestiality first. That's where the furries come in, the anthropomorphic stuff. So this is how vile child sex offenders are. They get off on raping kids. They're no longer normal. Their brains are psychopathic.
The chat is a little confused because they've heard your answer to pedophiles. Pedophiles are nearly impossible, if not impossible, to rehab. What about other sex offenders? Because they're asking, well, if they're impossible to rehab, then what kind of treatment can you give? How do you give them treatment if the rehab is almost impossible? And do you see rehabilitation in maybe other types of sex offenders?
Yes, I see rehabilitation, other kind of sex offenders. How do I approach this? I always want to believe there's hope. So I have guys right now that have harmed children. How do I approach it? The same. Who knows? Could somebody offend a child and not be? That's why, you know what? I'm always going to approach the guys the same. My approach is this. There's typical components in sex offender treatment. You're going to have family background issues. You're going to look at anger management issues. But if your treatment does not involve issues dealing with moral development, character development, and spiritual development, then it's futile. Because I have not worked with a guy, and I've worked with a lot of criminally insane individuals. Okay, somebody that can't tell the difference between right and wrong is very consistent. Those are the ones also that walk around virtually with the tinfoil hat. Okay, but if somebody pulled the blinds down or looked both ways before committing an offense, they were not crazy. Why? Because they're wanting to make sure they're not busted. Somebody that truly is criminally insane cannot, and therefore they will not distinguish between doing stuff in the light and doing stuff in the dark. They're criminally insane. They cannot differentiate. So the issue is conscience. I always hope that guys are, but when I read their offense, I know probably what I'm dealing with. But I'm always going for conscience, and I haven't met any guys. I've worked with a lot of guys. So we'll say 99.9% of the guys knew the difference between right and wrong. Therefore, it's not a lack of information. It's not they need a change of behavior. It's not cognitive behavioral. All of sex offender treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy. We get at the the beliefs, the mistaken notions, and all that. But it's not that they didn't know it. So I still have those components, and it's important to provide awareness into their thinking.
If you still understand the difference between right and wrong, is there some hope then to rehabilitate the conscience to start listening to what is right and choosing to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing? There must be some way. If you still recognize it, it's kind of still there, right?
No, because a psychopath can recognize the difference between right and wrong.
And it doesn't matter.
They don't care. As a matter of fact, they develop a disdain for it.
God,
it's very interesting.
Look, this kind of leads into one of the questions in the chat, which was, what is it with women in true crime? Why are you all so into it? And I'll tell you why. It's very simple. Because women are generally the victims of this type of crime, right? This type of heinous sexual violence and murder. I mean, there's a part of, and it's not that men are not victims also, because there are lots of men who are victims of crimes. But I think for women, it's particularly scary because, we have it ingrained. I don't know how men feel, because I'm not a man, but we have it ingrained in us from the beginning of time, our existence, that we must always be looking over our shoulders for that guy who's going to throw you into a trunk and torture you to death. I mean, it's just a thing that we have to be aware of, right? I don't know how much men spend thinking about this before they go get their keys and walk to their car, or before they,
They
I
don't.
mean, you
They don't.
don't. And so,
They
but
don't.
women, though, think about it every single time we are in
Correct.
a parking lot, every single time. And think about how many times you go to the store. Think about how many times you drive at night. Every single time I'm on the highway at night, the thought goes through my head, if someone bumps you, don't pull over. Remember, don't get, I mean, if someone's flagging you down, don't pull over. Like there's all these things, and maybe some of us get a little obsessed with it because we don't want to die violently. Okay,
There you
that's
go.
why.
There you go.
It's because I'm afraid of dying by the hand of some violent maniac, and I want to know how to spot them. I want to know, and I feel like, you know what, Dr. John, I feel like I'm never going to be able to do it. I feel like
That's right.
they're too good at what they do. And I've
That's right.
watched so many documentaries on these people. I've investigated some of these stories, and I think, nope, I wouldn't have known. Even as alert as I think I am, if a psychopath is out to get you, they're probably going to.
There you go. And Megan, and by the way, I don't have a doctorate. I appreciate that. I have a master's in this line of work. With how many detractors, I need to be very careful. So
Oh,
I
sorry,
very much
that was my fault.
I appreciate it. You've given me a promotion or an advancement, but I just, because the naysayers, I can just
I've
hear it.
given
If I
you an
didn't call,
honorary title.
that's right.
Hey,
Because
Dr. Jill does it. I don't know why anybody else can't.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of detractors, right? If I hadn't qualified that, people would say, "Oh, you allowed them to think you're a
Yes.
doctorate, or
Sorry.
master's degree."
He doesn't have a doctorate.
No, but the guys that are looking at you're right, Megan. I concur 100% that women are trying to figure out how can what happened to her so I can learn from that, so I don't do that. Guys here's the deviant guys. Any guy that's into any sort of snuff or slasher stuff, first of all, women, if you see any guy into that, stay far away from them. As well as, here's the precursor to it, is kink or BDSM or 50 Shades of Grey. They sell it now at Walmart as entertainment. I was doing sex offender treatment that morning. It happened to come out, 50 Shades of Grey. I'd never heard of the novel, written by a woman. Scary.
Scary.
I never heard of it. Right? It's
especially weird because it was actually Twilight fan fiction, which that's how it started, was a vampire fan fiction, which is just bizarre.
See, but it's all dark, deviant. You're going to see with that stuff, deviant sexuality. It all merges into very dark stuff. So there I am. I'm doing sex offender treatment group. I hear this being advertised. It was launched on the opening film was Valentine's Day, which was so ironic. I couldn't believe it. Well, I throw out to the guys. So there I am. Talk about a field research study. So I'm doing sex offender treatment in SEI Somerset, Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. The group room is right across from my office. I would do charting and it's just so, I had to know over the 11 years, what drove me is to figure out, how does a guy become a woman or a child's worst nightmare? Because I work with survivors. The other psych staff, bless their hearts, they weren't all that driven to know. They would just eight in the gate, get in, do their stuff, get out. But I was driven to know. So I'm working with these guys, and I said, "Hey, are you guys familiar with this 50 Shades of Grey?" I'd forgotten that on the block, they have regular cable TV as well, so they get commercials. Okay, so they all knew it was coming out. I said, "What do you guys think about it?" Now, to do research on sex offenders properly, it can really only be done in prison. I would not have believed that. But now that I know what I know, because you have to make yourself you have to be able to observe them 24/7. You have to be able to go into all their stuff. You need to be able to shake down their cell. You need to be able to see what they're looking at on TV, record their phone calls, all their communications, all their everything, in order to see what these guys are doing. They're the world's greatest liars. So really, nowhere else are you going to be able to do a 24/7 observation of these guys. So they come in, and what they said was this: in essence, they never thought they would see that grooming would become so easy, because now the women are grooming themselves. Because now a woman cannot discern between sexual assault and quote unquote kink. See, a woman thinks, and when they go to the movies, so use this as a screening method, ladies. Now you got to fake it. I casually ask them, "Hey, what do you think about this movie?" Right? If a guy is not aghast, and not so much so that he looks at you like, I don't want to deal with you, but if he is anything, if you see anything other than a little concern on his face, stay away from him. Why? Because for a guy to begin to get into that stuff, he has progressed through a lot of pornography. And he's no longer normal at that point. He thinks it's a reasonable proposition to cause you harm instead of treat you in a precious manner. That's a scary guy already. And this idea that, so first of all, the sex offenders would say, Mr. Uhler, you know, if we had known that was so easy, he said, we would have handed books out like that to these women. So the women's minds have been scripted. If a woman goes to that movie, she thinks, I mean, if you ask her typically, what was the movie about? She'll be able to tell you. She'll tell you the themes. She'll tell you the storyline. Most guys, if you ask them what was it about, I don't know. Basic difference between male or female. But the male mind, if it's being shaped and scripted by deviance, supercharged by porn, he's becoming very different. Ladies, do you really want a guy that thinks it's a reasonable option to put his hand around your throat?
Dr. Drew talked about this years ago, and I remember being so happy he said it, you know, because he had that show with Adam Carolla where they took calls about sex and stuff, and they kept getting these calls. It was many years ago. I want to say this was more than 15 years ago. They kept getting calls from women who would ask them if it was normal if that their boyfriends wanted to have anal sex with them. And one of them was 15 years old. And I will never forget Dr. Drew's response to her, because this 15-year-old calls him and says, I don't want to do this. And my boyfriend wants me to do it. And I don't feel like I should have to do it. And he got so upset, righteously so, and said, listen, what is happening here? Oh, yeah, it was called Loveline. What was happening here is that your boyfriend and all men, all boys, are getting corrupted by pornography.
Here we go.
And he said, what's scary about this, and he said it so long ago and it's come true. He said, what's scary about this is that it will only go one place, and it will lead to violence and death. He said that, and he got so much crap. People were like, you know, you're out of your mind. And he said, no, because it continues to get more and more degenerate. It's using women violently on camera, and then these men become to think that this is normal and that this is the way that people behave in the bedroom. And it isn't. It's not. It's not normal in any way. And they hadn't even gotten into the choking stuff at that point. It was just beginning. And he said way back then, this is going to lead to nothing but violence and death. And this is not something that anyone should be playing around with. And I agree with him 100%. I keep telling people, like, look, porn is bad for you. It corrupts the actual sexual relation that's supposed to be between men and women. It corrupts it completely to something else that is bad. And it is infecting even the conservative side of the aisle, who is supposed to be, you know, the more religious, the more conservative of traditional family values. It is corrupting the men on our side, who are now, and I believe, I just wrote about the misogyny on the right, and I'm telling you, it probably comes from porn, because
100% it does.
These are men who will not control their own porn addictions, and then they actually start to think that it is okay to treat women and talk about women as objects for their own pleasure, and that they're worthless, totally worthless. You will hear so many men who claim to be conservative, who are in this space, or libertarian, who will talk about women as hitting the wall when they hit 25. You know what that means? That means you've watched too much porn. That's what that means. Because a woman's value is not in her sexual attraction. And if you think that a woman's value is wrapped up in her sexual attraction, you're sick. There's something wrong with your brain, because women and men have equal value as human beings, period. Human beings. You don't need to assign a value to someone because of their sexual attraction. That's absurd. And how come these men that say that never do the same thing to themselves? They don't assign that same value to themselves. It's only women that they see like this. And where did they get this idea? Porn.
That's right. Megan, what I say to any woman is this: do not subject yourself to anal sex. Do
Oh God,
not.
no,
Okay, do
never.
not. As a matter of
No.
fact, it used to be, right? It
I
used to be
tell
this,
people all the time,
right?
this is
Oh,
I tell people, I warn them, this is a medical, you can have a medical emergency if you do something like that. I've
that's
researched,
right.
by the way, in my journalism, I actually, the first time Rush Limbaugh ever read one of my articles, it was because I put together these, something nobody ever had before, which was a study about the anal cancer that was becoming the new HIV in the gay community in California. And there was another study that nobody like put the two together. So there's these articles about, oh, anal cancer is the new HIV. Well, there was another study that was done that said that HPV, which causes the anal cancer, is primarily spread through anal sex. Well, they wouldn't put it together in the LA Times or whatever article it was. I did. So the actual medical research is saying now the gay community is suffering from anal cancer, and they wouldn't tell people that it was the anal sex distributing the HPV that's causing it, and people are dying. See, this is a thing that they won't even tell you. Not to mention prolapses, horrible infections from tears. If you tear the lining of that cavity, you are introducing waste into your blood system. Do you know you can die from that? I have told people this over and over again. It is not a joke. And this is why it pisses me off that feminists run around calling themselves sex positive and teaching teenagers in Vogue, teen Vogue, that your daughter should be your 15-year-old. This is how a 15-year-old girl should be having anal sex. Excuse me? No. Stop it. It's ridiculous. No one should be doing it. No one.
100%. Now, let me qualify. Megan, I can hear it already. Oh, you guys are anti. No, what I tell people is this: I'm not anti anything. Of course, I'm not anti anything. I am pro the protection of women and children. If somebody's going to run their mouth, okay, women, okay.
And men, by the way, because you're going to get cancer if you keep it up. And I know plenty of gay men who are not into anal sex. You do not have to be into anal sex. You just don't. This is not something you must do. And telling children that this is how it is done is absolutely criminal.
That's right. Women need to understand any guy that wants to do anal is already into porn. He's already deviant. Okay, we've heard this term. Just right. We hear this term vanilla sex. Okay, what is that? World of 31 flavors of vanilla sex.
That's the thing I like.
Okay, have somebody define that. Oh, you know, the missionary position. Oh, you mean the only position? No, are there other positions? Track with me, right? The people that I talk to. So the only position that you can have direct eye contact with your partner, you demean that. The one that actually makes it personal, you demean that. The one that, if the eyes are the window of the soul, where you have intimacy, you demean that. Why? Because you can't. Because if you have any vestige of conscience left, you're bothered. So anal sex, how much eye-to-eye contact? In kink, how much eye-to-eye contact? Kink is simply abuse that's somehow just, kink shaming, 100% yes. Anybody that wants to debate
100%
that?
yes. I love you. I'm a kink shamer too.
Here's the question.
I will shame you for your kink all day long.
And there's a real strong, I don't even know now these days, right? Kink therapist and gender therapist. Gender therapist, there's no such thing, by the way. It's a marketing scam.
Of course.
Okay? Gender therapists.
It's always about making money.
But gender therapists are dealing with what age? Typically teens. Why are they kink therapists? They wed them together, so to speak. They're introducing the deviant sex. They're setting these young kids, primarily girls, because the trans deception, when we had gender confusion, it used to be boys. Not very often, but used to be boys. But now it's 80%, 85% are all these girls. Why? Because girls are being freaked out, negatively impacted by porn. So they have one of two options. They say, I'm either going to have to be a porn star and be anally raped, or forget that deal. I'm going to Safe Haven. Well, Safe Harbor. Well, they think the trans deception plus 80 to 85%.
I totally blame pornography for the
100%.
Girls who want to transition. I totally
100%.
blame it, because who the hell would want to be a girl these days if you were told that to be a straight girl, you have to get anally raped, like you said.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm very clear with my teenagers, because I have 2 teenage daughters. I am very clear with them. This is not something you should ever take part in. I have told them this is not okay. It is not okay. And anyone who asks you for this should get scratched right off the list. It's a no-go.
And women need to understand, I've studied the minds of the men that would ask them. You do not want to deal with a man, okay? I'm a certified sex offender treatment professional. I have a research and clinical combined when they used to give that out through ATSA, the Association of the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. It took, I believe, 3,000 clinical contact hours to be considered, and it had to be, your application would go in front of their board. Mine was somewhat fast-tracked, not because they did a deficient job, but I had over 12,000 clinical contact hours. I'm telling you, there's not a sex offender that I haven't dealt with in terms of category. I understand the deviant sexual mind of men. Why? Because I work with them. I'm telling ladies, any man that suggests to you do anal has already been steeped in thousands of hours of progressive pornography. He's not normal at this point.
There's nobody, but who is? For God's sake, are there men left?
I still risk believing there are, but the question is, where are you going to find them? You're certainly not going to find them at bars.
I'm so concerned for my daughters. Perhaps the auto parts shop, ladies. We've been having a conversation about where to find.
That's right.
Where to find good men.
We can
the
probably
bookstore.
Okay, here's now.
Church,
you still need to be careful. There you go.
Although Dennis Rader was a deacon.
That's why you have to be careful. But listen, think about the bell-shaped curve. The question is, you're looking for a guy that has. We're talking morals. Now, where's going to be a place where it increases the likelihood of the pool of men that may be moral? Well, you'll start with the outside of the bell-shaped curve. You're not going to probably find guys in bars or nightclubs that have any morals. So I'd probably recommend not there. If you guys into hookups, you're probably not going to find it there. So you start to
blind dates.
Okay.
I personally think setting up friends is always a good idea.
That's a great thing. And here's the deal.
That's how I met my husband.
Okay. And keep sex and sexuality out of it. Screen the guy. How do you screen them? First of all, online stuff is so risky.
Look, I've got a certified person here telling me that what I told you is absolutely correct. Dating apps are not only dangerous, but they're ineffective.
Oh, they're perfect for predators. 100%. Perfect for predators. That's where the predators go. Now, what hope is there for women? It's slim, but listen, I don't want women to lose. I have a daughter. Now, she's married now, but what I would tell her is this, or any woman. First of all, I'm pretty faith-based, so you got to involve God in the process. Okay, but go where it increases the likelihood that at least a guy is going to visibly be aligning and ascribing to moral values. But psychopaths are in church all the time. 2 Peter chapter 2, written 2,000 years ago, talks about wolves in the flock or in church. Okay, so you have to be discerning. Don't be jaded, but don't take
serpents.
There we go.
Now, like serpents.
Keep the issue of sex and sexuality out of your dating for a long period of time. Save sex, old-fashioned thing, but I'll tell you what.
That is a good way to weed out the weirdos. Right? Because the weirdos will not stick around for it. They will not wait. They will not wait.
Right?
Most of the time. I'm not saying it's 100%. Some of them will, but
that's right.
But most of them
self-control.
Most of them don't have that.
That's right.
Yeah. I thank you so much for being here, Jon. I feel like we could talk all day, but I have to go because I have my dog has to go to the groomers today. The actual dog groomers. Not some weird sex groomers, but he has to go to the groomers because we can't even, he's shedding so badly. I have this German Shepherd and oh God, the hair is so bad that I've had him locked up in his room for like a week now. And I feel bad. I'm like, I keep taking him out to go outside and like leaving him there because he's like dirty. He's getting the whole house dirty. So I've got to get him to the groomers today. So that's what I'm doing. But I sure love talking to you. And I feel like you have a lot more stories that I need to get into. And I hope that you'll come back sometime soon.
Be more than happy to. It's been my pleasure.